Okay. I'm going to start off real quick. Like, where would our recording studio be if we were back in Shaker? Where could you imagine it?
I could imagine at the Linfield Rapid stop.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good one. That's a good one. Uh, I would imagine us, just because they have food and bathrooms nearby, Van Aken District. If like we had like a little section walled off and like had a live audience in front of us or something.
Oh wow,
Yeah.
It could happen.
Yeah. Yeah. We could make it happen. You know, we're from Shaker. We're from Shaker. We make
Dreamland,
dreams happen. Okay.
Dreamland,
Yes.
Dreamtown.
And that is the topic of our first episode today, because it was the um, sort of the inspiration or the nudge from my co-host Eric Green and I to say we need to talk about the Shaker experience from a person of color perspective, where experiences may vary. And I'm going to say that again for the people in the back. Experiences may vary. Comprende?
Even before I was made aware of this book, Gabe and I had been talking about our experiences, and knowing that Gabriel is a writer, I was nudging him and trying to get him to write a book or do some sort of movie or something that talked about our experience in Shaker Heights, being brought up in the experiential experiment, if you will.
Yes. Yes.
And after reading this book, I realized, and we both realized, that this would be a real good opportunity, especially on the eve of our 40th anniversary of Shaker Heights High School.
40 years, bro. It's crazy. It's 40 years. And then you wonder if there will be a 50, and like who will come to it, you know? So hopefully this 40th, trying to make it bigger and deafer. We have a kickball game going on Sunday, July 21st, and something at the Van Aken District place thing called Paloma. Yeah, and tour of the high school, all that. So yeah, I think it's really a good time for folks so inclined to come to kind of give a look at some folks maybe that they may not ever see again, you know, or something, or maybe what's the word? Have some truth and reconciliation, you know, whether that's friends, romances, what have you. So, yeah. And that reunion, by the way, is July 19th through the 21st. Kickball game on Sunday, 2 to 4 p.m. over at Ludlow. It's Moreland and Ludlow versus everybody. So that's the other Divine 7 schools who want to come up against the two primary schools that led in the forefront of integration. So let's jump into the topic of that book.
Oh, by the way, before you move on, are you wearing your 84
yes,
class alumni T-shirt? Let's show that off.
Yeah, there we go, right there. And they come in black and white, and the link will be posted soon on Facebook to be shared so other folks can order their T-shirt. And a portion of those funds will go to the Shaker Alumni Foundation, supporting the folks that are coming behind us. You know, it's about philanthropy. It's the Shaker way, service above self. Anyway, yeah. So let's talk about Dreamtown, bro. You start.
Well, I looked. What the book was able to do was to confirm and educate me on what we were really going through with the Shaker experience. You know, being as young as we were, really didn't understand what the impact was and how we had arrived at where we arrived, and things that are still going on that are leading the way in social and racial integration and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So the experiment that we were involved in still continues. It was a microcosm of what is still going on into America, trying to create the perfect union. But I was really unaware of the genesis of all of that stuff until I picked up that book. And since then, I've shared it with 2 other people that aren't even from Shaker Heights. So that's how instrumental and good it was to me that I had to share it. And I don't even have my copies around.
Yeah, I have a copy here. I know it's getting kind of buried in the green screen. Let me turn. There we go. Let me move it forward. What I got to do? Move it forward. Got to move it back. There we go. I got to tilt it back like that. There we go. Here's my copy. I highlighted stuff, and I went to one of her talks last late summer, early fall, when she was talking over here in DC at this place called Politics and Prose, and it was quite the Shaker DC area turnout. And there were some people there that were in the book. I believe family of the Mason family, some members of the Mason family, and some other folks. So it was nice. It was a nice turnout. She was really cool. She offered these like signature plates because I didn't get my book there, but I ordered it on Amazon, and I got like a signature plate that I stuck in the book. So, but for I'm just noticing. Hold up, before we get into it. I'm noticing something on you.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So in reading the book, which was very influential, I was thinking about things that our city that we grew up in have. And one of the things that really stands out is the rapid transit system. So with my artistic background, I decided, hey, why not utilize that icon and create some merchandise around that? So what I'm wearing is, let me stand up. I have the Shaker Rapid.
Oh, he really coordinated.
So I've got Van Aken.
That's dope.
The Green Line represented. And now I've got this Hawaiian shirt, which shows let's see, it's opposite of what I see in the camera. So I have the Green Rapid line and I have the Van Aken line merging. And, since I shouldn't be the only one wearing this stuff, we'll make this available. We'll make it.
Yeah, we'll make it available. We'll put up a link and folks can order. But those shirts are fly, man. That you're coordinating, as the late John Witherspoon would say. You're coordinating.
So there's going to be more of that stuff. There's going to be other things commemorating and celebrating our community. And it's something to be really proud about, especially the circumstance that we're in and with the school system and the people in the community, providing a backdrop, providing a North Star for the rest of the world to follow.
Yeah, you got to start somewhere. And, for me, I kind of remember the genesis of this book because Laura went on Facebook, and I was a member of like the Ludlow Facebook page. And I think she was asking for anybody from Ludlow had any stories to share. And she explained what she was doing and stuff like that. And I emailed her, and I kind of gave her this like real thickly dense, like soup to nuts, A to Z about my Shaker experience, like the good, the bad, and the ugly, I'll have to share that email that I sent her. And this was like I think this was like 2018, 2019. And but and then I guess she went off to write her book, and then eventually came out. So it was interesting seeing the number of people she interviewed and letting them speak, and then providing in her journalistic way an assessment or sometimes a narrative of a lot of the different touch points and stuff like that. So it read, and like anything, there was some stuff in there that might have been like a little bit dry, but overall, I mean, it was a good read, a prideful read. So I was digging it. And then there was.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no worries. I lingered. I was going to say, but it was really cool seeing neighbors that were mentioned in the book, like the Milter family, Carolyn Milter. The Milters lived a couple doors down from me on Keswick, and so I lived in Ludlow. I went to Ludlow, went to Woodbury, but I lived on Keswick, and Milters lived 2 doors down. And it was cool reading about her contributions to the integration efforts. And then there was other people in the general neighborhood that I was familiar with. And I was like, oh, wow, man, their shit runs deep. So.
Yeah, it's amazing the story that's told about the Ludlow area and the other schools that had to participate to make this whole venture work. It opened my eyes, and it helped me understand what people were going through and what a big sacrifice everyone had to make in order for this to happen. And in the 60s, at that time, when Shaker had really decided to take this upon themselves to pursue racial equality, it was a really huge step with what was going on in the community. And Martin Luther King and Ella Fitzgerald and a bunch of other people that were crucial in the civil rights movement used Shaker Heights as an example, a North Star, and they conversed with the leadership here in the Ludlow area and used it as an example globally as well as nationally. And that's captured in the book. What Gabe and I like to talk about is our indoctrination, assimilation, whatever you want to call it, what the experience provided to us, and then with what's been going on racially with our country, comparing and contrasting our experiences with what's going on and moving forward, what's presenting itself and how frightening it is, and and was that experience all it was supposed to be? And we have a lot to discuss about that, our experiences today, as well as in the future when we talk to other Shakerites.
Yeah. And so where did you go to? Tell us about where you went to elementary school.
Well, I lived in the Lomond area. We got there in '69.
Okay.
And we moved in, if you read the book, in which I understand that was the next bastion of where people of color integrated to after Moreland and Ludlow area. So we moved in. My parents were divorced about a year or 2 years in, and I did not go to Shaker schools. I went to the day camps. But since my parents got divorced, my mother needed to get me into school early so that she could re-enter the workforce. And I went to a Montessori school in East Cleveland. So although I was within the neighborhood, I didn't fully participate in the Shaker experience per se from an educational point of view until junior high, which was quite a shock to me. But that's when I started getting the full experience of Shaker Heights.
Now you went to Byron, right?
Yeah, I went to Byron. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. For me, my family came there in 1972, and we were an Air Force family, and I think we moved from New Jersey, Orange or Plainfield, New Jersey, there to Warrensville for about a year, and then to Shaker, and went to Ludlow K through 6, did Woodbury, and then Shaker. And Ludlow, I think, Ludlow was, as we found out later, like I didn't know that anything really about that growing up, but Ludlow was a ground zero for the integration efforts. And I mean, I lived blocks away from the house that got bombed back in the day, but I mean, again, K through 12, didn't know none of that. So
and you had siblings. I had older siblings that came from the Mount Pleasant area of Cleveland.
Okay.
And then adjusting to the curriculum, as we read in the book, and probably that you experienced, as I experienced, was somewhat of a challenge if you didn't start from baseline in the Shaker School District.
Yeah. I remember there was a test that I had to take when I was at Ludlow. I vaguely remember this random test. And, from like the kid's point of view, I just remember the adult from like maybe mid-chest all the way down, that was the kid point of view, and giving some papers and stuff like that. But I didn't learn how to write until kindergarten. And it was Miss Alperin who taught me how to write. And the beauty of it is I'm a natural lefty. So I wasn't pressured to write right-handed or anything. I wish I had become ambidextrous, but yeah, I learned how to write my letters in kindergarten at Ludlow from Miss Alperin. It's one of those major teaching moments that I'm sure you have as well, of certain things coming up through that school system.
Well, I was always right-brained, which I think a lot of that was nurtured at the Montessori school. And when I got to Byron, it was a rude awakening.
Hold up. I have to shout you out. Okay. So, I mean, we're, this whole podcast is going to be like some jazz and shit. My man next to me has 72 patents. Okay. Let that sink in. He has 72 patents. Look him up. Eric D. Green, U.S. Patent Office, Trademark Office. So again, this tells you, right brain. Yeah. This ain't no fly by night dude right here. So anyway, back to it, man. I just had to.
It is what it is. I still run from numbers, but we're constructed, we're built the way that we're built. So I used to hide. I was a year behind, so I'll give that to me. But math was a huge struggle in junior high and high school, to the point where I was a year behind, and friends like Mark Nance and Daniel Tepper will remember me hiding my math book. I had this orange bag that concealed the math book, and when I went to class, I made sure the hallway was clear, and I snuck in and ran to the back of the classroom so no one could peer in and see that I was in that lower math class than everyone else. So there it is. There will be a lot of come to Jesus or truths being told, but that's one of the first truths I'll tell. So I've recovered, but yeah, I still have dreams about that, by the way. Something just never go away.
Oh man. Yeah. We did some dirt back in the day. Greg Fuller and I, a bunch of other folks. Yeah, we were quite the mischievous kids. But I'll talk about that stuff at a later date when we have our, classmates and other Shaker folks on to wax nostalgia about everything. So, it's interesting about the trauma. We can use that word about the math book and that in that stigma, and it brings me back to like thinking about how much just how much pressure, various levels of pressure that one may have had, especially as a student of color, and then all the other hierarchical things that come with being in like high school, the cliques and everything else. And
well, let's talk about the stress of entering the fringes of Shaker Heights.
Yes.
And the expectations that were put on us by our peers as much as from our family. Yeah. And just the everyday struggles of just finances from a point of view where a lot of us, our families, I call it entry level entitlement.
That's a good word. That's a good word.
And we tried to, I tried to burnish or tried to utilize the cachet that was associated with living in Shaker Heights, and reading the book, it was refreshing, and it helped me understand that I wasn't the only one in this situation, but understanding what it took for the other Black families to at least get into Shaker and try to prosper, and then try to keep up appearances like my family tried to. But in reading the book, it really was comforting to understand the other people in the community that were going through the same thing that my family was going through.
Yeah. I mean, I describe my family as living in there in Ludlow as working class folks with middle class aspirations. And like my dad worked at Eaton Corporation. He had to drive there daily, way out to the hostile West Side. That's another conversation about, we talk about Shaker apartheid, but just the racial polarization in and around Shaker, whether it was coming from white folks or our own skin folk. Tell me about that. Tell me about that story with Mark.
Oh yeah. So Shaker became pretty much an ivory tower. You'd have incidents, but we grew up together in the same neighborhoods. And the shocking thing about all of this is that Shaker, for the most part, was a Black and Jewish community. Yeah. Didn't see a lot of other people of other races living in the Shaker. Saw a few Asian people. I remember Keith Asamoto from Little League Baseball.
Right.
Never saw a lot of Hispanic people, almost not at all. We associated that with the West Side. And I think it was one summer, I don't know what year it was in high school, Mark Nance, who I hung around with on the regular, asked me what I was doing one afternoon. I think it was Saturday or Sunday. And he said, "Oh, we're going to Murray Hill, me and some other girls that happen to be Jewish."
Oh,
And I
Murray.
said,
Gosh.
"Dude," I said, "you mean the Feast of Assumption in Murray Hill?" And he said, "Yeah, man, it'll be fine, so forth." I'm like, "Dude, you can count me out. I am not going anywhere near that place." Because I had even heard stories from my father and taken my mother to Case Western Reserve in the 60s, and he got into a scuffle back then, a physical scuffle. So I said, "Nah, man, I'm not into it. Count me out." So he pulls up in my driveway, and I'm figuring, oh, we'll find something else to do. There are two Jewish girls. I don't remember their name. And we headed down towards University Circle. And I said, "Oh, geez, you're not really going to go to the Feast of Assumption, right?" And he's laughing, like, it's not no big deal.
Right.
And of course, I became the joke, the brunt of the joke, because I wasn't getting out of the car. And after a point, they got out of the car, and I wasn't going to be a sitting duck in the car. So we start walking towards the feast down the back end of Murray Hill. And you should have seen the faces of enjoyment and horror all wrapped up in the same thing. It was our looking at the crowd, and even the police were wondering what the hell we were doing.
Right.
So I just knew that I had to keep a straight face and keep my head up and not look anyone directly in the eye, but also not look like a punk in the process.
Right.
So as soon as we could, I saw a policeman to the side and asked him if he could walk us back down the hill. And of course he said no. But at that point, somehow, some way, I voiced that this wasn't the place that should be. And I think Mark and his friends decided that it was a good idea to hightail it out of there as quickly as possible. So that was one of the best and biggest lessons I found out about living in Shaker Heights, it being an ivory tower, and knowing that everyone wasn't on board of the Shaker mantra and the experience.
Yeah, no, real talk. I mean, I think about I remember there was like a certain perception of if you were Black from Shaker, from other Black people in Cleveland. And I remember specifically like in high school, I mean, the other like Shaw, JFK, Marshall, they all had it out for Shaker, the Shaker bougie Negroes. And that was the thing that was crazy. Like, and to your earlier point, I mean, yeah, there were some well-to-do Black Shakerites, but then there were a lot of working class poor that were attending. And so the fact that, like, from that perspective, if you were Black from Shaker, people automatically thought you were bougie, stuck up, a wannabe at times. And I remember tragically there was some scrap that went down at a Lawson's near the border, I think, of Cleveland, and like in the Lee Harvey Harvard area. And
Lee Harvey Oswald area.
Yeah. But this brother named Chris something got his head beat in. And I do remember, like, my mom writing a letter to the Plain Dealer or the Cleveland Press, just talking about this, like, self-loathing hate and that Black folks have for other Black folks, and we know that a lot of that sometimes is informed by like social econ. I mean, you think about, like, in the book, Laura talked about how the Black residents had just as much of a vested interest as the white residents in keeping their property value at a certain, at a certain threshold. And so then there was this like kind of like reverse thing where we got to get white families into Shaker to kind of balance out, the Black Shakers, So, and I remember her book documented well some of the debates and, feelings of people who felt, either way about it in terms of doing that type of calculated, what's the word I want to use? Populating, in regards to that. But even today, I still feel this little self-consciousness sometimes when people ask, where are you from? Depending, I'll say, I'm from Cleveland, or I'll say from Shaker. And again, depending on who the person is and what they may know, there's either a stigma of, affluence attached to it, like, are you an uppity Negro? Or it's like, oh yeah, you're, I'm from the hood. I'm from Glenville or some other place, and just kind of like, coming at you in a way. I've had that happen, relatively in the last couple of years from other Black people from Cleveland when I said I was from Shaker, and it was almost like this automatic assumption. And then so.
I've gotten that from white friends that grew up in neighboring communities. For instance, a couple of years ago, someone came in that moved back to Europe, and during the pandemic, or it was just before the pandemic, Little Fires, that show that was on Netflix about Shaker. They were watching that.
Yeah.
And I think there was a reputation that Shaker took hold of because of all the publicity in the 60s and Paul Newman and all the other people that derived from Shaker, that it was put on a pedestal. So when I met up with her, the first place she wanted to drive was through Shaker.
Oh, okay.
And she talked about, it's not that big of a deal, it's not that nice. And of course, places don't look really good, especially in Northeast Ohio, when springtime starts to come about, because you see all the garbage and the snow and all that other stuff. But as a parent, there was just a stigma with being from Shaker. And we also carried that attitude. I mean, I remember just going to Cleveland Institute of Art and meeting up with other people from around the Cleveland area, and just seeing a real, how should I say it, difference in our perceptions. I mean, Shaker was definitely, Shaker and Cleveland Heights, which I relate my experience, my Cleveland experience to, were really liberal. And the West Side was more of a working class type of attitude, even though my parents were, I guess, working class, blue collar workers, they still had a very liberal approach to life. So it was very different. I was looked at upon, it seemed like two different cities. But in reading the book, we also realized there are two Shakers. And that's what we need to really talk about and explore. Like, what did we get out of that experience? How do we see it compared to the experiences we're having today?
Yeah. I would say the term I like to assign myself growing up was a term that hadn't been coined yet, but it was blurred. I kind of wish I knew that term growing up, and I had examples identified by that term. Just coming through junior high school and high school there, because it was like straddling worlds and dealing with, you're trying to be an Oreo, or you are an Oreo, you're wannabe. And I mean, that even like translated into clothing. Like if you wore topsiders, chinos, or even Ralph Lauren type things, that was considered trying to be white. And then, we flash forward like 15, 20 years later, when all that stuff has been embraced by urban, primarily urban culture and stuff, and elevated. So it's just, a place of conundrums. You take for granted, I think, the smaller things, like when we went to high school, just coming up to school in general, like your reading comprehension level. And when you get out in the real world and you see the writings of maybe other people or hear how they're speaking, and I'm not talking slang or anything, but just certain aspects of communication, you realize like, oh, wow, yeah, there is a difference out here in the world.
Yeah, when I entered college, which Laura Meckler talked about, just the Shaker experience and the competitiveness with the kids from an academic standpoint prepared you for a higher level education. Now, I was mainly level 3. I did take some, and we should talk about the leveling system as well, which is something I learned a lot about from Laura's book. There was always competition, academic competition, and I felt like I didn't belong unless I was taking some sort of level 4 or level 5 course.
Mm-hmm.
And what I learned was it wasn't always about, how should I say, intellect per se, or IQ, which you would generally think, and especially coming in as a person of color from another school system.
Mm-hmm.
You feel like you're at some sort of disadvantage. You're at an economic disadvantage for the most part. So now you're competing with other people that have different experiences from you, more, I won't say more enriching, but different experiences where they get to travel during the summer, seeing Europe.
Or going to Lake Chautauqua.
Oh, yeah. Or I knew a kid that went to Ted Williams baseball camp, which I died to do,
Wow.
So
he was probably still living back then, right?
Yeah, he was actually. Yeah, it was.
Okay.
Oh, what was his name? His name will come up. So those were the things that separated us. I mean, our vacation was going to the amusement park. I remember going to Akron, and I thought that was a big city. So, compared to my peers and my classmates, the experiences were definitely different.
Yeah, for sure.
Where were we? I was heading somewhere and I digressed. I was trying. Oh, this is what I wanted to say. So I was in a level 5 history or level, I can't remember, but this was the mind-blowing, eye-opening experience. So I just assumed that everyone did their work independently and did their research independently. No, that wasn't the case. I went to Danny Wyman's house.
Wyman.
Which he lived just off of the side streets of Lomond. Yeah. And maybe we'll get him on the show one of these days. But
who could beat Steve Smith in running, supposedly.
Oh, yeah. I've read about that.
Anyway. I'm sorry. You never asked me.
So we were, I thought we were studying for some test or what have you. And then all of a sudden the phone was blowing up. This was before cell phones. I mean, pretty much before fax machines. It was like a headquarters, like a brain center. People were, it felt like the New York Stock Exchange. Information was coming in and coming out. And what was happening was all these kids were in these high level courses and they were doing the coursework and trading off the answers, because that type of load, that type of course load was too huge for one kid to really carry. So they used strength in numbers and traded off that information, which is a college approach.
Yeah.
So that is something I learned. I think Emily Hooper was on the line, Jimmy Hexter. I remember those names, the brain trust of Shaker Heights. So mostly Jewish kids or some black kids, sharing information. But, in late life, that's basic. But I didn't know of any of our other brethren, black people doing the same thing, that we're just unaware of those things. And
yeah, it recalls something I witnessed a couple of years ago, but it was over actually, and it made me think of Shaker. It was over at Orange Library, and they have like a nice modern library. And this was maybe about 4 years ago in the spring. I went there to meet up with this brother to talk about a podcast, and it was maybe about 6 o'clock. And in the lounge area, there were a lot of young brothers in their tank tops and slides and stuff, and they were all playing NBA, or it might have been Madden, one of the two. But then in the study rooms, which were all like glass enclosures, it was all these white kids studying. And that was the thing that me and this guy Phil immediately picked up on, and like, interesting here. And again, it goes back. I think it goes back to when black families. I think Laura's book talked about that a little bit. Black families came to Shaker. There was that, of course, that higher aspiration, and then yet, I think with some, they just thought it was enough that your kids were in Shaker, and that you didn't have to do something at home to help foster that level of expectation or excellence and stuff like that. Because parents worked. Some parents had basic education and stuff, and so it was interesting, the intersectionality of all this, like of certainly race and class, and then how it translated. Going back to your comment earlier about levels. Yeah, I was level 3. There was no identification for me or push to say, hey, you should try an AP class or anything of that nature. And when it came to studying, I just did the bare minimum, just following what other people were doing. But I knew I couldn't come home with no D's or F's. I did get a couple of D's or stuff like that, but math was probably like my weakest thing. Human relations enjoyed that class, or the arts class, and English somewhat. It really depended. But yeah, it was, I don't know. You can make the argument that it all starts at home in some way, shape, or form. And what is established as the expectation and the value to go for,
Well, what we're learning through just with the Ivy League schools is that how culturally biased the SAT is.
Mm-hmm.
And, even until, I have to admit, even until recently, affirmative action, I was not made to believe, but I thought that the playing field or the bar was lowered for people of color so that they could attend these traditional Ivy League schools. But that's not the case.
Right.
You still had to be academically strong to be able to attend these schools. So there's all this stuff that we carry, or these thoughts, or these tropes that I'm learning aren't necessarily true. And it's I'm proud of the Shaker community for taking on this task and still, pursuing this ideal. They thought that putting all these people in the same community would give the Black community the wherewithal or the opportunity to prosper. But there's more to it. There's still racism, and there's still other things that are holding them back, institutionalized things that are just so deeply ingrained into the fabric of American life, and that we're still trying to understand. And just secularly, you look at the United States, how I thought it saddens me, and especially the pandemic taught me this, all this stuff that I thought were truths that aren't really truths, and why they're not truths, and the history that's been kept from us. And now that the history that is being retold and is trying to be expunged and whitewashed right before our eyes.
Right.
So, and just looking at the history of Shaker, what it started out as, the Quakers, the Shakers, were looking for equality for everyone. They started to create their own utopian society, welcomed everyone. And then how that was taken by what we kind of see now, more of a greedy, money-making venture to create Shaker Heights, to create a place that people of high wealth and means could partition themselves from the rest of the world. And that built up our community, but then it came full circle again, or tried to come full circle, and trying to solve the integration and the things, that all the ill doings of society, which it's still working on, thank goodness. But yeah, it's a nice time to look at and read this book and understand where we stood, where we are in history, and what we should do from here.
Yeah, and I hope the book becomes like required reading, maybe at Shaker and in some class. It'd be nice if they could. I don't know what, I certainly don't know what's on their curriculum there, but it'd be cool if they had a class like Parsaliti had, human relations. That was a very popular class, and Pars was. He was a real one. I remember he was a World War II veteran, and he talked about having to kill Germans. And so, I mean, I say all that is that he brought a level of realness and reality to that class within Shaker. And but yeah, I think the book it should be part of the reading curriculum there at Shaker. And I'm glad it was written, and there's certainly more stories to tell, and we hope to add to those stories of bearing witness to the Shaker experience with this podcast. And we will be featuring our fellow Shakerites, past, present, maybe future, known and unknown, all adding to the quilt, the multicolored quilt, the mosaic of Shaker Heights, Ohio.
Before we close this show, our pilot rendition of this show, I would like to ask you what the Shaker experience, what growing up in Shaker, coming through the Shaker school systems, what it gave you, or if any advantages outside of that environment.
I think I wouldn't trade the experience of growing up in Shaker for anything. And yeah, maybe if I had advanced knowledge how to manage, the fucked up shit. But if anything, it gave me, what's that word they use these days? Code superior.
Code switch, or
yes.
code, yeah.
Yeah.
Code switching. I just learned what that was. Yeah.
Yeah. Superior code switching skills that, in a weird way, growing up in Shaker, I have reference points for a lot of diverse people, because I'm like, oh, you kind of remind me of somebody I knew growing up or interfaced with back in Shaker. So yeah, code switching, a sense of competition, a sense of striving for a certain standard or aesthetic, and just some, I don't know, imaginary cachet, or just feeling like, yeah, that you're part of, you're part of a community that is known for something, and for those who know. So I think I came away. That's what I come away with that.
Yeah, exposure. What I saw at the Shaker was it was a nice exchange, cultural exchange. I saw the white kids uh, in the Lomond area, sharing lingo and sharing likes in music, sports, all that stuff. It was cross sectional or what have you.
Yeah.
And I know that there are a lot of points in time that I can point at that are really influential to me today. When you want to meet someone that is different from you and you can speak to them about things that culturally they don't think that you were privy to.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And just the
Especially
people that were, yeah, I remember watching rock bands at rest in peace, Tim Elliott, I believe.
Yes, rest in peace.
Player with the band Attic. I remember going to a Byron talent show or what have you, and his band was on, and they played More Than a Feeling by Boston. So that was a big introduction to rock music because I grew up in Motown.
Right.
My mom listened to Broadway stuff. She had a wide variety of music and literature, but I wasn't really exposed to the harder rock per se. And then see people like our peers play hockey and win state tournaments, to see them have interracial bands and play rock music. And that was just really eye-opening. I remember talking to a guy at work, and he was talking about Judas Priest. And I told him, yeah, I like that song United. And I'd heard Steve Smith and his band play that at Sussex at some sort of
okay.
John Johnson and Arnwine. And it just, you always felt inclusive. There was always a group, whether you wanted to talk to other people of different per se backgrounds or experiences. It was open. There were like different entrees that you could experience, and them as well. So that's what I enjoyed about that experience. And I think Cleveland Heights had a similar experience, but it seems like it was more of a granola type hippie experience.
Yeah, Yasgur's Farm, Woodstock. That's also like with me. I mean, it was it was a masala of especially with the music, like Run DMC, Led Zeppelin on the same cassette tape, or being exposed to what was that group, like like the Police, especially like a lot of the new wave stuff that was coming out of the UK, and the rock stuff because of the Home of the Buzzard, WMMS, and just being open and receptive to it, despite people on both sides like having cognitive dissonance at the fact that you knew something about rock or other that they wouldn't expect you to. I mean, I would say I recently, about a decade ago, I experienced that. I did a short film called Fleecing Led Zeppelin, and I took one of their stories of being robbed of like their money at Madison Square Garden from their hotel safe deposit box. And my ex-wife and I, at that time, we spun a short story around that featured a Black cast. And that film was constant cognitive dissonance to a lot of fans of Led Zeppelin. And, there was some racial shit that was thrown at me on online, like, how dare you, this is our sacred cow. And then, again, who you're talking to, what their reference and context is like, yeah, Led Zeppelin foundational is Black music. So it's just, yeah.
I remember going to, it was 81, and I looked this up online, and it really did happen. Bunch of us, me, George Hopkins, Robbie Mears, I think I went to it was supposed to be the Rolling Stones last tour in 81, where you had to send away for the tickets.
Oh, wow.
I went there.
Yeah.
And I don't know who was with me at that concert, but I went the night after. We went to go see Foreigner at the Coliseum.
Okay. Richfield.
Yeah. I'll never forget some white dudes yelling out their car. There's no basketball game here tonight. I remember going skiing with my friends, and I remember falling on the slope with some skis. We had access to a lot of things that most people at other places that of our ilk don't have access to. And I remember, we lived in an ivory tower, and then having these moments, these moments of clarity where I fell down on a run, I guess, learning how to ski. And this guy overhead on the ski lift looked down at me and said, "I should spit on you, nigger." And I was so pissed. I was waiting for him.
Yeah.
I couldn't see him, but I wanted him so bad. I was waiting for him at the ski lodge.
Yeah.
It's just such bullshit. The stuff that I thought was being fixed with evolution per se is not where I thought it should be or where it is. And that experience was both good, eye-opening, but to look back at it 40 years from now, it really needs a real good look and discussions, especially with our classmates, to see what they think and what they're experiencing.
Yeah, it's interesting about the classmates. I will say that I've come across classmates, white classmates, who certainly wax poetic about growing up in Shaker. And again, every experiences may vary, but at the same time, I'm like, well, how much does diversity, equity, inclusion in their current life really is? It's, for some, it's almost like they are just repeating the status quo of their parents and those before them in that thing. And so, for me, it's like, just because you might have gone to a high school that might have been almost half Black doesn't mean you're all of a sudden, aware, culturally aware. And so, sometimes I get that vibe from some of our classmates. And then when George Floyd's murder happened, I remember I was on a group text, and nobody was talking about it. And I brought that up, and it really kind of turned me off from a bunch of people who, sometimes looking back, and that was only 4 years ago, that I suspect were probably Trump supporters. But Trump has nothing to do with that necessarily per se, but just like, you went to Shaker. Do you have any awareness or care about these issues? Because you went to Shaker, and again, I think there's, some folks that just, no, it wasn't part of their reality. And so why should they care? So, yeah, it's interesting about who you talk to. regarding that experience, especially from Shaker. And yeah, because even like on Facebook, I'll say there are, a couple, like I think there's a couple pages related to Shaker, and it's interesting to read some of the commentary of people who post, because they're also posting, it happens to be predominantly white, but they're also posting from a particular time period. And so that Shaker is the romanticized, this is when Shaker was Paul Newman, glamour, and everything else. And, not so much, Shakers also has this Black population. And so it's an interesting conversation. And, especially when we go up into this 40th reunion and check the vibe or the pulse of people. And I'm also curious, like, how many of our classmates read Laura's book? That'd be interesting to see. And if they have anything to say about it, because I feel if you're going to talk about diversity, you have to have it in your life, and it can't be on some passing person at the coffee shop or, in the office. It has to have some meaningful interaction with your personal life. And so if you don't have diversity in your personal life, you can't talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's just like, shut up. So, and so I think with Shaker, it's about who's framing that conversation and who you're talking with.
Yeah, it's I've seen instances while I was at Shaker, even seeming in comparison and contrast. I think we were sort of in a golden age in society, looking at where our parents came from and what my parents were doing. Very active politically. And I just remember some instances in school that showed me otherwise, like how far we didn't come. I remember some comments that were made about our cheerleading team, our cheerleading squads not being diverse enough from a white point of view, and it not really representing the school. So some of those comments took me back a little bit.
Yeah. I remember being up at Van Aken Center back at the old one, and it was like early evening, and I think I'm walking to Sands, where I worked at Sands for a couple of years, and there was a group of white boys that walked past me, and I heard that low frequency talk, and it was like, "You think there's any more up ahead?" And so it's just like, the microaggressions, we didn't necessarily know them by that term, but the microaggressions were there. They were there. So
it was as much as we were put together. We and it's highlighted in the book. We did see a difference from the elementary school to junior high to the high school. It just became more and more divided. I think I saw it in division of threes, and it also reflected Lomond, which I grew up on, starting from Lee Road, which was the entree into
that was a DMZ, bro.
Housing. Yeah, exactly. And not even we'll get into another show about the blockades, the actual blockades.
Shaker Heights apartheid Shaker Heights. Yes.
But you can definitely see the gradation, if you will, from Lee Road all the way up to Sussex, and then crossing over into the Byron area. There was definitely a color palette per se, and it reflected economically and everything else.
Yeah, I mean, that was one thing that was deep about just going back to the book, was Meckler talking about the garbage disposal plant being placed in the Moreland area. Yeah. And just the fact that Chagrin 422 that went into the, what's that word? Verdant hinterlands of Northeast Ohio, green rolling lands, all the way back down. And at a certain point, it became Kinsman. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, you knew, and even businesses were very clear about where they were on Chagrin or on Kinsman. You just knew, like, oh, if you're on Kinsman, it's a Black business or close to it further down. Like Lee Road was the DMZ right there.
Yeah, exactly. And you can see the development and the aesthetic, how different, how Van Aken, what's the new place in Van Aken called? The district is.
Yeah, Van Aken district. And now they got a big luxury high rise going up where Ohio Savings Bank in the parking lot across from the Linfield station is up now. It's like blotting out the sun.
Oh, wow.
Somewhat over there. Like you can probably pull it up on Google, and there's supposed to be luxury apartments coming there and stuff like that.
Do you remember the controversy of actually getting a fast food place? And when they finally allowed Wendy's, it had to be real Tiffany and had to fit all this criteria so that it wouldn't be your mere fast food joint in Shaker Heights. I remember that.
Yeah, because I remember there used to, well, Bob's Big Boy was where the
Manners, yes.
But no, I didn't know that about Wendy's having to fit that requirement. And then now I think it's, well, not relatively, I haven't been there in recent time, but I think they did an upgrade there at the corner with the restaurant or something. That was always a pain in the ass to get in and out of that spot, man.
Oh, yeah.
But that was a cool block.
Yeah. The Draeger's and ice cream places and the Vogue Theater. Is that where you're talking? Yeah.
Yeah. And on the same block as Wendy's, there was that Chinese spot, and then Malcolm Brown.
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
he
Malcolm
had his
Brown
art
gallery.
Yeah. It was like the first Black man to have an art gallery in Cleveland or something like that. You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That was also interesting too, because I think he taught at Shaker, and his sons and daughter, like the daughter went to Shaker, I think, Rhonda. She's like the current Cleveland Arts Commissioner now or something.
Oh, wow. I read about that.
Yeah. But the sons, they went to US. I mean, that was another thing too. I mean, there's so much shit we're going to be able to talk about.
Oh, yeah.
But, the whole private
scratching the surface. Yeah.
Yeah. Within Shaker, that whole other level, Hawken, US, Hathaway Brown, Laurel.
And how about the sports system, the farm system from what was that Catholic elementary school? Damn, what St. Dominic's. St. Dominic's, yeah.
Yeah, right there on Van Aken and Linfield. So yeah. Hey, there's a whole lot coming for you all. And we thank you for tuning in and watching. And you need to read Laura's book, Dreamtown, Shaker Heights and the Quest for Racial Equality. It's been going on the ticker for the entire time,
There's plenty of YouTube videos. There's at the city clubs, at libraries. You can also, Amazon, definitely go immediately to Amazon.
Shout out to Laura Meckler. Thank you for writing it. I think she went to Longmont or Sussex, so she's from your neck of the woods. Wow. I think she was like class 8.
We're going to talk to you about our experiences, your experiences, people experiences. We want every Shakerite experience that we can access, if you will.
Yeah,
and, we'll have fun with this podcast.
The old heads from back in the day, Paul Newman's day up to, the present. So, yes, thank you for tuning in to the Shaker Heights since 1911. And remember, experiences may vary. All right.